Okay, and we are starting now. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about the resting, graded, and action potentials. Okay, so these are all forms of electrical activity that can occur within a nervous system cell. And this electrical activity occurs when charged particles called ions, remember we defined that already, they move back and forth across the cell membrane. So when there are a bunch of ions on one side of the cell membrane, and they're all very, very positive, or they're all very, very negative, this cell has created an electrical potential, okay? So nervous system cells can experience 3 kinds of electrical potentials. So let's begin. All right, so the resting, graded, and action potentials. All right. Okay, so let's start with the resting potential, okay? So sometimes this is called the resting state. So let's write this down. Resting potential. This is also sometimes called the resting state. Okay? And specifically, this is when the inside of the cell is just a bit more negative than the outside of the cell, okay? It's usually between 40 to 90 millivolts. But the point is the inside is more negative than the outside. We'll get into how that happens in just a second. So for now, we're just going to write down, this is when the inside of the cell is, and I'm just going to write here, 40 to 90 millivolts, okay? This lower M and big V is an abbreviation for millivolts. And if I write it out, it's M-I-L-L-I-V-O-L-T-S. Millivolts, more negative than the outside of the cell. Okay? All right. So at this point, let's go ahead and draw our cell membrane. Okay? So remember, what is our cell membrane made out of? It's the 2 layers of phospholipids. Okay? So remember, there are these heads with the tails. They go like this, okay? Okay, so I'm going to zoom out now because we're just going to show, okay? So we're going to pretend that this is outside the cell, okay? And this side is inside the cell. Okay, so remember how I said that if anything wants to pass through a membrane, what does it need to go through? It needs to pass pass through some proteins, right? Okay, so there are some special proteins involved in creating the resting potential. And it's going to have this symbol, and you'll find out why in just a second. So let me erase part of my cell membrane. Give myself plenty of room. Okay, so this protein, it's called a sodium-potassium pump, okay? And we'll find out why in just a second. So I'm going to draw like this, okay? And this side is going out of the cell. And then over here, this side is going into the cell, okay? All right. So this is our membrane protein that is going to let stuff go in and out of the cell. So what is going in and out of the cell? Okay, so we have on the outside of the cell, do I have enough colors? Yes. Okay, on the outside of the cell, we have lots and lots of sodium, which, oh right, I remember that green was hard to see. So let me do it this way. I will write in black. Okay, so sodium ions are positively charged, and I abbreviate them with their symbol from the periodic table of elements, which is Na. Okay, so we're gonna have lots of sodium ions on the outside. Okay. And there are a couple of sodium ions on the inside too, just not as many. Okay. All right. Then what else? We also have potassium ions. Remember when I was talking about the glia, which one was it? The astrocytes? They clean up any unused or extra potassium from around the neurons. Okay, so we're going to find out why is there extra potassium floating around? So, okay. So here we go. So potassium symbol is a K. And potassium is also positively charged. So the inside of the cell and the outside of the cell has some of these potassium ions. And I'm going to give them this diamond symbol. Okay, so in this setup, the sodium-potassium pump, okay, so let's make like a legend. We'll do that over here. So the elements of our diagram are, we have sodium ions, oh wait, hold on. I'll do it this way. I don't want to confuse you, so I'll do it over here. So this is going to be our diagram legend. Diagram legend, okay? A diagram legend just is something on a diagram that tells you what all the symbols mean, okay? All right, so we have sodium ions. So this is a sodium ion. Then we have our potassium ions. Potassium ion, which has an orange diamond shape around it. They don't actually have these shapes, I'm just using these right now to symbolically represent them, okay? And this big guy over here is our sodium-potassium pump. So let me draw a smaller version. Okay? So this is called a sodium potassium pump. And we'll find out in just a second why it is a pump instead of just a channel, okay? So in this situation, the outside of the cell is more positive. Have I run out of colors? Okay, let's do it this way. So the outside of the cell right now is more positive than the inside of the cell, okay? So the inside, so the inside of the cell is more negative than the outside of the cell, okay? And that is because these pumps, when the cell is doing nothing, when it's just resting, it's just chilling and hanging out, I don't know if you noticed, but there are 3 circular like slots here that maybe sodium could fit into, right? And then there's over here this kind of sharp triangular slot where maybe a potassium could fit in, okay? So what these pumps do is, when the cell is doing nothing at all, it pushes 3 sodium ions out and pulls 2 potassium ions in at the cost of 1 ATP. And do we remember what ATP stands for? Adenosine triphosphate. And that is the molecule used for energy by all living cells. Okay? So we're going to say here that it sends three sodium ions out, and here two potassium ions in. And it really is, in the protein, there are special holes that only fit certain kinds of ions, okay? So it's like a puzzle piece. Here we go. Okay. So this is Na plus, Na plus, Na plus. Okay? So when the cell's doing nothing at all, it's actually working pretty hard. It's moving these ions in and out and in and out, okay? And, oh, let's not forget our one molecule of ATP, okay? So every time it pushes 3 out and 2 in, it needs 1 molecule of energy, okay? So if it's doing this over and over again, it's using up energy this whole time, all right? So this creates an electrochemical gradient. Big new word, okay. This creates an electrochemical gradient. So let's underline our new word and define it. Electrochemical gradient. Okay, so what is an electrochemical gradient? So the main idea here is that ions always spread out when there's too many of them. So when there's too many sodium, the sodium all want to go to the other side of the membrane. And if there's too much potassium, then the potassium are like, I don't want to be next to other potassium, okay? So they're a little bit antisocial. You can think of it that way. So ions always try to spread out as far as they can if there are around too many of their own kind, okay? It's kind of like if you ever go to a family reunion and there's too many cousins and it's really just too confusing and you just like, I just want a break. I want to go find a quiet room. That's what the ions are doing, okay? So usually what happens as more sodium gets pushed out and more potassium gets pulled in, the sodium wants to come into the cell. They really, really want to come into the cell. And the potassium really, really wants to go out of the cell. So there's this gradient, okay? It's almost like there's like a slide that they want to slide down and they want to leave the area that is too crowded, okay? So it's this tension is called the electrochemical gradient. So let's define it like this. Ions always try to spread out if they are around too many of their own kind. Okay. All right, so the last thing to know about the resting potential is that almost all cells in animals, plants, and even fungi, they maintain this resting state. So this is really important for anything that is alive, all right? So, almost all, actually I'll just follow the convention that I've been using before. Almost all cells in animals, plants, and fungi maintain a resting state. Okay, and I use the word maintain here because it's work. It's the resting state, but it requires work in order to have the resting state. Okay? All right, so that's our resting potential. Okay? So then, the next potential that we're going to talk about is called the graded potential.